community engagement here at the Tennessee Department of Health. We will get started here shortly. First, a couple of housekeeping rules. As we all know, there'll be lots of people on this call, so just please be a reminder to make sure that your phones and your computers do stay muted, please. We will allow for both the guest speakers to present for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have about 20 minutes at the end for question and answers. If you think of a question prior to the time we get to the Q&A, by all means, please put it in the chat, and we will get to it during the question and answer period. With that being said, I'm going to now pass the microphone to Dr. Kimberly Lamar. Dr. Lamar?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for taking the time to join this Lunch and Learn. So May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Awareness Month. And as a part of this celebration for this month, we have two great guest speakers that will join us to facilitate our conversation today. Our first speaker will be Dilani Gunawardene. Dilani is an epidemiologist at TDH. She is currently in our CDEF division. And then we also have Masami Tyson. Masami Tyson is with the state of Tennessee. She is the current global director of the Foreign Direct Investment and Trade for the state. And so I look forward to hearing from both of our special guests today. And so today we'll start. Our first presenter will be Dilani. You have the floor.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
We can, Dilani, and let me share my screen so we can look at your PowerPoint.
Sounds good.
You're all set.
Thank you. All right. Hi, friends. Like Dr. Lamar said, my name is Dilani Gunawardene, and I'm an epidemiologist in the Communicable and Environmental Diseases and Emergency Preparedness Division. I'm really excited to talk with you all today and share some of my story. Next slide, please. Okay. First, I would like to wish everyone a happy Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, or AAPI Month. So AAPI Month is observed annually in May to celebrate contributions of the AAPI community, and this year's theme is Advancing Leaders Through Purpose-Driven Service. If you'd like to learn more, I would highly suggest visiting the Federal Asian Pacific American Council's website, also known as FAPAC. And to celebrate AAPI Month, I'd like to share a bit of my background with you all by paying homage to my parents. Slide, please. My parents are both first-generation Americans, meaning they were born outside of the US, Asia to be specific. And now a mini lesson for those of you who maybe aren't so great at geography like myself. You may or may not already know that Asia is the largest continent, and it's comprised of 48 countries and over 2,000 languages are spoken there. Next slide, please. I'd like to zoom in a bit and introduce you to two people. Next slide. This is my father. He was born on a small island in South Asia called Sri Lanka. He's actually on the call right now. Next slide, please. This is my mom. She was born in Southeast Asia in a country called Cambodia. Now, my parents had very different reasons for moving to the United States. Next slide. My dad wanted to move to the US because America is the land of opportunity. He ended up leaving his family behind to live with his aunt, who was already living in Maryland. And he eventually led the way for his parents, his sisters, his nephews, his nieces, all the people I grew up with to do the same. My mom, on the other hand, was coming to America to escape the Cambodian genocide. Next slide. For those who aren't familiar, during 1975 to 1979, a communist party, the Khmer Rouge, ruled Cambodia. They organized the mass killings of anyone who was thought to be educated, religious and ethnic minorities, and they claimed the lives of nearly 2 million people. Many were sent to labor camps, prisons, killing fields across the nation, and hundreds of thousands of others died from disease, starvation, or exhaustion. And to this day, my mom's parents and siblings are still in Cambodia, and my mom supports them from afar. Next slide. As a second generation Asian American, meaning I was born in the US, but my parents were not, it's very difficult for me to even put into words how grateful I am for my parents' bravery and all the sacrifices they've made to make sure my brother
800-981 is not available. At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries. Like I was saying, it's
rolls today. Okay, let me share again.
Sure. Thanks. Like I was saying, I'm really grateful for my parents' bravery. They've sacrificed a lot for my brother and I, just so we wouldn't grow up with the same struggles they did. My parents' stories, they're remarkable, but they're actually not that unique. Next slide, please. There are over 20 million Asian Americans living in the United States, and they themselves or their parents' parents came to this country in pursuit of better lives. And these same people in the land of the free are now the targets of anti-Asian hate crimes. Next slide. I want to take us back to a little over a year ago to the start of the pandemic. The FBI warned that it expected a surge in hate crimes against those of Asian descent. There are reports out of major cities of Asian Americans being attacked or threatened, and these stories are not limited to the US. There have been several reports out of Canada, the UK, and Australia as well. Next slide. Next, I'd like to highlight findings by two groups. The first is the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University. They released findings in early March that showed hate crimes against Asian Americans spiked 149% in major cities between 2019 and 2020, even though hate crimes overall declined. And I'll repeat that part right there. Even though hate crimes overall dropped 7% amid pandemic-driven closures of businesses, schools, decreases in public gatherings, hate crimes against Asian Americans increased. And a new report was released just last week, and the data revealed that the increase in attacks against AAPI has only persisted. They compared data from the first quarter of 2021 to the same time period in 2020 across 15 major cities, and they found that the hate crimes surged by 169%, continuing the historic increase in such attacks last year. Now, I want to talk about hate incidents, which is defined by the Department of Justice as acts of prejudice that aren't crimes. These are also on the rise. Next slide. So a group called Stop AAPI Hate was launched 1 year ago by a coalition of 2 Asian American advocacy groups and a university department to help Asian Americans report hate incidents during the pandemic. They've cataloged nearly 3,800 hateful incidents between March 19, 2020 to February 28, 2021, not limited to crimes. Types of discrimination include verbal harassment or name calling, avoidance or shunning, or being coughed at or spat on. The center says that the number reported represent only a fraction of what actually occurs. Racism against AAPI is not new. Next slide, please. What really brought anti-Asian violence to the spotlight were the March 16th Atlanta spa shootings that claimed the lives of 6 Asian women. These women were daughters, sisters, mothers, some single mothers, some grandmothers, some business owners, avid cooks. And before we knew the names or ethnicities, family backgrounds, or migration stories of these 6 women who were murdered, we knew more about the man charged with shooting them. Since the shootings, companies and organizations have made public statements to stand in solidarity with the Asian community. And those in the AAPI community have been more vocal about standing up for themselves and have encouraged others to report hate incidents and crimes. Next slide, please. Still, there is a divide within the Asian community, particularly between the younger and older generations. Culturally, we're often taught not to speak out or to shrink ourselves to avoid causing trouble. But with anti-Asian violence turning deadly, it's more important than ever to combat racism. There are several reasons for underreporting of hate crimes or incidents within the Asian community. including language barriers, especially among immigrant communities or among elders. There's also distrust of the government and law enforcement. Many Asian immigrants came to the US to escape oppressive governments. The government or law enforcement hasn't generally been a source of support for these communities. And lastly, Asian immigrants face the added burden of the model minority myth. Next slide, please. The model minority myth is the cultural expectation placed on Asian Americans as a group that each individual will be wealthy, hardworking, docile, uncomplaining, and never in need of assistance. Next slide, please. The model minority myth does a few things. It puts Asian Americans in this other category, or forever foreigner category, and it implies our experiences do not warrant programs or policies of anti-racism, and it further divides and pits Asian Americans against other minority groups. Asian Americans are left out of both the American story and the American racial story. History books do not talk about the Chinese exclusion laws that prevented Asians from immigrating to the United States or becoming citizens, barring them from voting and due process. They do not talk about Chinese Americans being lynched. Without acknowledging the stereotypes Asian Americans face, we will continue to be left out of efforts to address discrimination. The model minority myth both congratulates Asian Americans while simultaneously leaning on the same image to discount and marginalize their experiences. Now, if you are anything like myself, you may be in the process of learning how to do better for yourself, but also for your community. I do think having conversations like this is the best place to start, and it's more than okay to start small. For the next part of my presentation, I would like to talk about microaggressions and what you can do about them. Next slide, please. I thought this one article summed it up pretty well. Microaggressions are the everyday slights, insults, put-downs, invalidations, and offensive behaviors that people of marginalized groups experience in daily interactions with generally well-intentioned people who may be unaware of their impact. The difference between microaggressions and blatant discrimination is that people who commit microaggressions might not even be aware of them. But the effects of microaggressions are cumulative, and it's often referred to as death by 1,000 cuts. These cuts can often be overlooked or normalized. Microaggressions often convey to targets the message that they are foreigners, criminals, dangerous, a threat, or subhuman. Next slide, please. We're going to look at 3 examples of microaggressions, the themes they fall under, and the message they send. When a second-generation Asian American like myself is asked, "Where are you from?" and I reply, "Maryland," and they ask, "But where are you really from?" Or, "Oh wow, you speak great English." The underlying message is, you are a perpetual foreigner in your own country. You are not a true American. Next slide, please. The next theme I'd like to highlight is colorblindness, or statements that indicate a person does not want to acknowledge race. An example in this case would be, "When I look at you, I don't see color," or "America is a melting pot." This erases and denies a person of their racial and ethnic experiences and identity, and assumes one needs to assimilate to a dominant culture. Next slide, please. And the last theme I'd like to touch on is denial of individual racism, or a statement made when a person denies their racial biases. "I'm not a racist. I have several Asian friends." Or, "As a woman, I know what you go through as a racial minority." No one on this planet is immune to race, nor does your friend group excuse you from your implicit and explicit biases. And racial oppression is completely different than gender oppression. Again, microaggressions can have good intent. It's the impact that is not so good. Next slide, please. While they are called microaggressions, the effects are anything but. Studies show they increase stress in the lives of people of color, they increase depression and negative feelings, they impede learning and problem solving, they impair employee performance, and they take a heavy toll on the physical well-being of targets. On a larger scale, microaggressions lower the standard of living for groups of color, and they create inequities in employment, education, and healthcare. Intent does not supersede impact. At the end of the day, If somebody says something racist to you, it's racist. And if it hurt your feelings, it hurt your feelings. But if you commit a microaggression, it's also important to know that you are not a bad person. You just need to be more aware of your biases and impact on people. Next slide, please. Now, this is a very, very, very simplified rundown on responding to microaggressions. So first, we're going to start with those who are responding to a microaggression about you. You may need to take a second to breathe, particularly if this is your 1000th paper cut. If you do decide you feel safe enough to confront someone, first, you need to be clear. You are not calling the person racist, just their actions or words. Next, you want to let the person know that you are not shaming or blaming them. You were hurt in some way, and you felt it was important to initiate a conversation. Next, you want to ask them how they're feeling after you've shared how their actions have impacted you. And then you wait and listen. But be mindful that you may not get an answer that you'd like. They may play it off, they may be defensive. And lastly, you accept the outcome and you move on. You've done what you can to address the issue. Next slide, please. Now, this is also a very, very, very simplified rundown on responding to microaggressions if you receive feedback about something you've said or done. So one, you want to listen to what the person has to say. You do not say, oh, I meant it as a joke, or, oh, I didn't mean it. Your words or actions have hurt someone, and you should not invalidate their feelings. The next thing you want to do is verbally acknowledge their feelings and make it clear that it was not your intention, but you understand that it created a negative impact. And then you apologize without making the emphasis on you needing forgiveness, because you may or may not get it, and that's not up to you. Lastly, just as someone responding to a microaggression directed at them, you also need to let it go and move on. Just like any other mistakes we make in our lives, we live and we learn. Next slide, please. To close, I just want to say that there are several themes that microaggressions fall under. Alien in your own land is one we touched on today. If you'd like to learn more, I would suggest visiting the website here. It explains each theme and message and provides examples. Next slide, please. Also, there are tons of websites you can visit to learn how to stand up for yourself as a minority, or how to serve as a better ally, or what organizations can do to reduce bias. Next slide, please. Lastly, I would like to emphasize that it is no one else's responsibility other than your own to make sure you navigate this world with decency and respect for others. I hope you found this presentation helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Delaney. We're going to, again, if there are questions, please put them in the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Masami to go ahead and share her screen and start her presentation. I'm seeing a lot of questions about will the presentation be available? Absolutely, of course. If you are a TDH employee, we will be sending out, just like we sent out the invitation, there will be an email with the attachments as well as a link to listen and watch this again. If you are outside of Tennessee Department of Health, it will be posted on the Division of Health Disparities Elimination page on the Tennessee Department of Health website. I will drop that in the chat. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Masami. Go ahead. Uh-oh. Try to unmute now.
Goodness, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. There you go.
We've been doing this for over a year, and every time someone does that on a Zoom or WebEx, I think, goodness, get it together. But here I am. And so, hello, everyone. Masami Tyson. As Elizabeth said, I am the Global Director for FDI and Trade for the Department of Economic and Community Development for the state of Tennessee, ECD. So before I start, thank you for that excellent presentation. Is it Delaney, or I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly?
Almost, Delaney.
Delaney. I am so sorry.
No
Delaney.
worries.
Thank you so much, and I agree with everything you said. I feel that what I'm about to talk about is actually going to supplement a lot of what the points that you brought already. But before I go into that, first of all, I just want to thank Dr. Lamar, Elizabeth, Monique for this opportunity. Thank you, Department of Health, for allowing me to share a little bit about my story today. I just really feel that, you know, part of how we embrace and tackle a problem is by acknowledging it first. So while the events of this past year or so have been extremely difficult, I am not going to say I'm glad they happened, but I do think that it's good that people are starting to talk about anti-Asian hate, along with the other social justice issues that are rampant here in our country. And I'm a firm believer that, again, as I said, the first step in tackling and solving problems is by acknowledging them. So I hope that some of what I share today will be part of that solution. But again, before I start, I wanted to take this opportunity to share a little bit about what our department does, and specifically in my space. As you are all aware, our department is tasked with bringing jobs, creating jobs for Tennesseans. And the good news is, as my commissioner likes to say, and now my slide is not moving. Here we go. Is that 1 out of every 3 jobs created in our state is by foreign companies, international companies in the state. So my job is to support and manage our team of foreign directors. They're located in parts of Europe and in Asia, and they're the team that's tasked with identifying the companies in the specific countries and their specific locations who are interested in coming to the US and investing here and hopefully ultimately in Tennessee. So here are the flags that represent some of the countries in which we recruit. This is an old slide, so we no longer have an office in China, but otherwise we've got a representation in each of these countries and more. We also have now a director in the UK. He is our newest addition. So between all of them, we recruit in about 15 countries. And as I said, and here's a statistic that's going to surprise many of you. Most people are really shocked to find out that Tennessee actually has been ranked #1 twice in the last 5 years. #2 in 2018, which is, I think, the latest data set we have for foreign direct investment job commitments. So it is not California, it is not Florida, although we do compete for the #1 spot with each of those. That's the definite winner in this. We are really doing very well in terms of attracting foreign companies here. So why am I talking about all of this in the context of what we are talking about today? Well, when these foreign companies come to our state, they locate in our various counties. Not all of them are in Middle Tennessee. Some of them choose to locate in our rural and even our distressed communities, for which we are so grateful, and they create jobs there. And what I witness over and over again is not only do these companies create jobs, they bring a little bit of their culture. Of course, a lot of expats come and locate here along with the establishments. You know, again, I really believe that when you mix us all up and shake us all together, it's inherently a good thing. In other words, to see different cultures, to see different backgrounds, colors, religions, belief systems, that is inherently a good thing. And it's really wonderful that through my job, I'm able to witness that over and over again. Now, in terms of numbers, here's a slide that shows how much these foreign companies are contributing to our state. So as you see here, well over 1,000 foreign companies call Tennessee home. And that means over 145,000 jobs for Tennesseans. And in terms of investment dollars, it is well over $38 billion, which is extremely, extremely significant. I love to share the story of this was about a year and a half ago or so. So we had an Asian company locate in one of our very rural communities. And I love to tell the story. It was so cute because at that time, I think the company had not yet decided on Tennessee. We often compete with other states. I think Georgia was probably in the mix, North Carolina perhaps, and Kentucky. And the CEO of this Asian company was looking at some sites in rural Tennessee. And we had a meeting there with the county leadership. And I remember the county mayor saying to the Asian CEO, we'd love for you to come. We're so grateful that you're considering us. We have a great community. We have great Southern hospitality. We have a wonderful workforce. The other thing we can offer you is if you decide to locate here, we'd like you to come back and join us for our Christmas parade, which is one of our biggest events in this county. And he said, not only that, we'd like you to be the Santa Claus next year. And of course, the Asian CEO was quite taken aback by that, quite embarrassed. I don't know if he actually did come back and do that, but that company did locate in that county. So all that is to say, the work that ECD does, we're able to bring right here to Tennessee a lot of cultures, a lot of backgrounds, and then in turn, our communities embrace them, which is a wonderful thing. Let's see, here are the top 15 countries that have created jobs for Tennessee. Japan is by far the biggest investor, both in terms of job creation and investment dollars, which is the next state. But needless to say, each of these countries and companies are extremely significant for our economy and also for educating our Tennesseans and for the Tennesseans playing a role in educating the rest of the world about who we are as Americans. I'm now going to move on to my other slide deck. And this is going to have a very different feel. This is a personal slide deck about me. And again, before I start talking about some of the themes and topics of anti-Asian hate, discrimination, and microaggressions and the things that we can do about that, I want to tell you a little more about my personal story. Now, this is a slide deck that I used about 5 or 6 years ago when my youngest daughter was maybe in 2nd or 3rd grade, and her homeroom teacher asked me to come into the class to talk about myself. So I actually am a first-generation American. That is, I was born and raised in Japan, and I came to the United States to attend college. So this is what I titled the slide deck, and no one knew the Eddie Murphy movie because it was a bunch of 8th graders in my audience, but never mind. I said, I'm going to tell you kids about my story. Now, I have intentionally decided to use this slide deck, although it's quite simple, geared towards an audience of 8 and 9-year-olds. And I decided I would intentionally do that with you because this story of being an Asian American, being an immigrant, is quite simple, actually. The truth is, I was born and raised in Japan. I've got my Japanese background, my Asian heritage, of which I am extremely proud. And as you already heard today, there is a little bit of a, not dilemma, but a dichotomy of Asian Americans needing to be acknowledged that we are American, period. At the same time, we are very proud of our culture, our heritage, and we cannot afford to be stereotyped or misunderstood. And the onus is on us, Asian Americans ourselves, to share our stories, and that is why I'm so thankful for this opportunity today. But also, the burden is on you to embrace us and to accept us as part of America and not just the current day United States, but a part of the United States history. This country has been made of immigrants like myself and of all the racial diversity and other types of diversity that exist here. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I came from Japan, and here is a very stereotypical photograph of Japan. There's Mount Fuji in the background. That is the tallest mountain. It is a dormant volcano, which that's pretty scary. We do have a lot of earthquakes, not necessarily related to this volcano, but we are told that that mountain could actually erupt at some point, and we hope that it doesn't. But in any event, that is a symbol of Japan. The cherry blossoms there, also a symbol of Japan. And then the Shinto shrine there, another symbol of Japan. But again, I don't want you to think this is it when it comes to Japan or Japanese Americans, because although this is very much a part of our heritage and my story, this is not all who I am. In fact, I just mentioned to you that that is a Shinto shrine in the foreground. I am not a Shintoist, neither am I a Buddhist, although most Japanese people are. In fact, I am a Christian. And that puts me in the minority, but there are all kinds of Japanese people. So that is part of understanding who we are. We are not just the stereotypical Japanese or Asian. And I really appreciated that slide that showed all of Asia, because it illustrates how big we are. And there's so many cultures just within the Asian continent. Not only that, as I just described to you with my example of my religion, not all Japanese people are Buddhist or Shintoist. So again, this is part of understanding our cultures, educating yourself when the opportunity presents itself. And again, so grateful that you are here today listening to what I have to share. Now that is a map of the world. It says Sekai Chizu next to it in Japanese. Little story or a little lesson here. The Japanese language is made up of 3 alphabets. One called the hiragana, the second type called the katakana, and the third is kanji. And what you see there on that slide is kanji. Kanji was adopted from China, and they look more complicated than the other 2 types of alphabets we use. But in any event, again, another stereotype, or maybe not so common, but some people assume that if I'm Japanese and I can read and write kanji, which I can, then surely I understand a little bit of Chinese. Well, the answer is no. A totally different language, although we borrowed and adopted a lot of the Chinese characters. Most of them have a different meaning, and most of them have been modified to the Japanese set of kanji. Now, just anecdotally, most Japanese people can read and write hundreds of kanji, and the 2 types of alphabet, and it is a very, very challenging language to learn. In that world map there, the little red country there, I'm sorry, the resolution's not that great. That's Japan, very small country. It's about the size of California, geographically. And here's a map of Japan. And I am from Yokohama, which is right around there, sort of in the middle part of Japan. It is right next to Tokyo, which is the capital city. That's what Yokohama looks like. It's a very, it's the second biggest city in Japan, so a big population. Another stereotype about Japan that you might be aware of is that Japan is very crowded, and maybe you've seen those photos of those super crowded trains and subways. Well, again, that's only a small part of Japan. If you go to the areas outside the big cities, there are major rural areas, just like here in Tennessee, beautiful countryside. So those are some photos of me wearing the traditional kimono, that is the Japanese traditional dress. I am 20 years old in there, which is the coming of age ceremony in Japan. I've been thinking about this these photographs and that ceremony a lot lately, because my oldest son is about to turn 20. And of course, he is both Japanese and American by passport, by citizenship. But he was born and raised here. He did spend 4 years in Japan as a very young child, but very much he has very much become an American, just as I have. But we do try to preserve some of the traditions in our household. And then finally, just another slide showing that sort of the stereotypical things about the Japanese culture. So the right top picture, that's another picture of me. That was another ceremony, and I was 3 years old in there, I believe. And then to the left of that is Japanese animation. I think these days, especially young people, are very much into that. We're well known for the very high quality Japanese animation. And then sushi, of course. And then to the bottom of that is sumo wrestling, traditional Japanese sport. It's our national sport. And then I was telling you about the 3 types of alphabets. Right there in that the bottom middle is a chart of one type of alphabet called the hiragana. That's what Japanese kids learn initially. So in first grade, they learn how to write each of those characters. That is a phonetic alphabet. And then on the right bottom is a car. Again, I think around the world, and certainly here in Tennessee, we are known for our high quality cars, and that is a Nissan vehicle, and needless to say, that is one of our most significant foreign direct investment companies here in the state. Now, that's the end of my slide deck, so I'm going to get out of that, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And for the rest, I just wanted to spend a few minutes telling you a little more about my experience as an immigrant and as a first-generation Japanese American, some of which you have heard about already. So, as I said, I was born and raised in Yokohama, Japan, but I've been here in the United States for over 30 years now. I came as a college student, and, you know, frankly, I think that I feel 100% American and 100% Japanese. And I became a US citizen about 15 years ago, but even before that, I think I really experienced that journey of learning how to become an American and assimilating into this culture, figuring it out, and here I am. But as a part of that experience, I have experienced some hardships. So for example, and unfortunately, these are some very recent occurrences, I have had people come up to me, and because of my job and my position, I have opportunities to engage in public speaking. And I was at an event, and I was speaking, and somebody came up to me, and the presentation was not about myself, it was about the work I do. So that person had no idea that I actually was born and raised in Japan. But he came to me and he said, you know, I look at you and I can't believe how your English can be so good. So think about that. And again, if you knew, which you now know, that I was born and raised in Japan, I'm an immigrant, first generation American, you know, perhaps that statement is fair, right? You know, I spent the first 18 years of my life living in Japan, so it would perhaps be a compliment. But this gentleman had no idea about my background. He was purely looking at the way I appeared. And I didn't look like him. He was a white gentleman. And, you know, I actually smiled and carried on. And I tell that story for many reasons. Again, you know, the fact that somebody felt it was okay to make that statement purely based on my outward appearance, the color of my skin, the fact that I did not look like him. And secondly, I didn't know what to say to him. And as I mentioned earlier, just a few minutes ago, you know, I think the burden is on us, minorities too, to speak up, to know what to say in those kinds of situations. So I'll leave it at that. On another occasion, I was speaking about my background, actually, because I was asked to do so. And somebody said to me, I am so delighted to hear that there are actually productive immigrants. And again, that was extremely offensive to me, not just for me personally, but on behalf of all the immigrants that have made this country what it is today. I mean, this country is made up of immigrants. Without that, it would not be where it is today. So I also share those two specific stories because I think, you know, the whole idea of being colorblind, the whole idea of saying, well, I don't really see race. I just, you know, don't even think about that when I talk to you. We do carry those burdens. And as I said in the very beginning, I am actually relieved, maybe is the right word, that the anti-Asian American, anti-API discourse is now being had, perhaps many years late, but I think that it is high time that we embrace that. I also think that, you know, this country is big enough to embrace all the races and to talk about each specific one and the injustice that is occurring with each. And finally, I really hope that we all band together in this, because without it, we will never be able to solve this problem. So I hope that was helpful, and I hope that was useful, and I'm very happy to take any questions as well.
Wow, thank you so much both to Masami and to Dilani for these amazing